Hi, everyone. Welcome to Deliberately Intentional with me, Remi. Today's topic is 7 things I did to become more intentional, and we're going to jump right into it. Most times, people often ask me, well, why do I need to be more intentional? Or how can I become more intentional? Because it seems like such a big word. And for many, they understand it, but they don't know how to actually apply it to their day to day lives. So, this is me giving you guys a little inside peek as to how it's made me better. First thing you have to do is you have to figure out what it is you want. At different points of our lives, we're all going to be working on different things. In my 50s, what I'm working on right now is definitely going to be different from someone that is 20 or someone that's 18 or, even someone that's older than me. We're all going to be working on different things. But when I first started to become intentional, I can say that it was not something I had planned. And that was probably when I tried to come back to Nigeria from living abroad by myself with my sister. And I really wanted my family to come together. And I started to make plans with my sister saying, we are not coming back to America. Granted, that was not my sharpest or smartest move at that point in time. But back then, I was really, really focused on bringing family together. And I didn't want us to be apart. So, of course, I put a plan in motion to make sure that we were all back together. Kind of similar to what I do today. Almost everything I do is it's towards that bigger goal, and it is to bring my family closer and closer together. At multiple points in our lives, there are so many things that are going to happen that could actually pull you guys apart if you're not making specific, purposeful moves to make sure that instead of pulling you guys apart, you're bringing you guys together. It starts with, what do you want? For me, it's all about family. It's all about pulling us together. I want us to be happy. I want us to be successful. I want us to stay connected. But I never explained to you the why. A family that is connected, no one, nothing can pull apart. You guys are powerful together. The goals are unified because we're all working towards the same thing. You're happy. There are very few flaws that come of a family that is closely connected. But the one that is not, I can give you a long list. You're not connected to your family. You're going to connect to something else. It might not necessarily be the best for you. Your family is always going to look out for your best interest. So, as I said, for me, family, always. Number two, I had to understand myself. Now, what does that mean? Outside of being self aware, I had to understand what my flaws were and also what my strengths were. Now, for me, without going into specific details, in the early days when I started intentionality, I had to come to grasp with my temper. I had a temper, didn't realize that it was connected to my trauma. I just knew that it wasn't helping me. Neither was me being emotional. That didn't help me either. In fact, if anything, I used to have made some really emotional decisions that weren't actually the best. I'd always regret it. So I needed to stop doing that. I had to work on my patience. Obviously, there's very little that comes into play and works out for you if you're not patient. Nothing just happens like that. You have to work on it. And so I had to work on my patience. I had to work on being less emotional. I had to work on not taking things personal because I knew that all of those things, if I did not deal with them, they would impact me in the long run. They always did. So the sooner came to terms and I was very self-aware of myself, it made a huge difference. But it also means that as I understood myself, I was able to make sure that the people that I was choosing to surround myself with were also aligned with my goals, especially my partner. See, if you don't know yourself, you'll end up picking somebody that might not necessarily work for you. You'll think, okay, the person's attractive and all, but do their strengths work with your flaws? Are you going to be a good match? Because I knew enough about myself and I knew what I needed, I knew that the person that I had chosen to be my partner was going to be a good one. I had those thoughts way back then. That's over 24 years ago, believe it or not. But it's important to your intentionality because if you pick the wrong person, it doesn't matter how intentional you want to be. The person you've chosen is wrong. You can't force somebody. You can't force a square into a round hole. It's just impossible. It's going to be extremely hard. And some of us are doing that because we're not picking the right people and we're not finding people that work with our strengths and flaws. Number 3, I wrote down everything I wanted. I used to be a major writer back in the day. I used to have diaries for, my diaries were supposed to last for a year, but mine would be a month because I was writing, writing. But I always wrote down my goals too. The beginning of the year, as I got older, I kind of stopped. I've stopped now, but I should probably get back to it. But my point is, I wrote down a lot of the things, and that's what made me check myself, because I wrote it, let's say the 1st or the 31st of December, and I continued to write throughout the year. I would always go back to what I had written and to see how far I was from the things that I said that I wanted to achieve. Okay, I want us to get closer, for example. Okay, what are you doing exactly? If you're hanging out with your friends the entire time, you're not going to get closer. Oh, I want to be a better mom. Okay, have you checked yourself? What have you done? What did you do wrong last week, and how are you correcting yourself this week? But those are the things and the checks that I had to put on myself. I wanted to be a better sister to my siblings. I had to think about, okay, what was our conflict and how did I miss it the last time, and how can I make our relationship better? How can I understand that each sister is different, and just so many little things. But I always wrote these things down, and that helped me stay intentional and focused. Number 4, I incorporated my family into everything I was doing. Now, this is a common mistake that many do. Everyone kind of has, let's say you're that little girl, or you were once the little girl that had this plan about, okay, this is what I want to do. Most times, you don't add your family to that plan. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to bring this person in. Okay, let's say you wanted to get married, but did you factor in, did you leave a little space for that person's personality? And a lot of the time, we don't. You don't factor in that, you know what, this person is going to be distinctly different from me. How am I going to adjust? How am I going to make space for this person? So for me, I've done that for the 2 most important people in my life, which is my son and my husband. And I started that from the very beginning. It's like while I was pregnant, I've said this many times, while I was pregnant, I was always thinking about what kind of life was he going to have, and what adjustments was I willing to make sure that I could be the person that he needed me to be. I've also said before that I was a better, I think I was a better mom than I was a wife. I became a better wife as time went on. But in the early days, by the time I had my son, I had done more planning for my son than I think I did for my marriage. Along the way, my marriage got better. But initially, it was my son, me being a mom to my son, that allowed me to become a better wife. Weird, I know. But that was my story. That's how I became, that's number 4 about how I became more intentional. I incorporated my family into everything I was doing. So with time, it became second nature. I could never just think about just myself. I was always doing things for myself, but the things I would do for myself were never in such a way that it excluded my family. It always included them. So, and that's kind of what also helped us get closer. And we've all grown together to have our individual lives, but also lives that are thriving in their own right. Number 5, I had to understand the different traits of both my husband and my son, because both of them are like night and day. They're very different from me. A lot of us are not doing enough of that. So let's say, for example, if you truly know your husband's story, because it should always be starting from your spouse. If you know your husband or your wife's true story, then you should also see, even if you may not realize it, you should also be able to see there are certain things about them that sometimes they don't even realize. I always say that I probably know my husband better than he knows himself. And that's because my son says I have a PhD in both of them, and I do. I know them that well. I know when he's off. I know when the mood is off. I know when he's about to be sick sometimes when he doesn't even know. That is just how well I got to know them. But it's also an intentional thing because I wanted to get to know them. The more you get to know a person and a thing or a job, anything, the better you're going to be able to do that job. And I take being a wife as a very important job here's the reason, because it makes me incredibly happy. I wanted to be really good at this. And because I wanted to be really good at this, I learned how. And intentionally, once I began to study him, it made it easier for us to understand each other. It's not that of course, he has changed, but for the most part, it's because I got to understand him. That's how I knew which way to get through to him. This works for both men and women. He knows me better now than he did in the early days, but I also had to teach him things about me. We're both from two different worlds. So it took time and a lot of intentionality to get that going. But it is one of the things that I do and I practice on a daily basis. And I believe that if you do that too, it will help your relationship greatly. Number 6, I I know I mentioned this before, but it's something I do daily. I make conscious choices that will bring um, us together more so than anybody else. And I'll give you a very good example. I've been working out prior to me meeting my husband. I'd always been working out. I've always had a trainer. The minute we started dating, I'm like, oh, you have to meet my trainer because this is something I do on a regular basis. And I'm like, if I'm going to continue doing this, because I wasn't planning on changing it, I need you to also get involved with it. Now, of course, he had worked out in his life. It's not like I was the first person to introduce to him, but I'm not sure whether he had a personal trainer, but I did. So I wanted to involve him. I paid the extra money for my trainer, and I'm like, hey, whenever he's in town, you're going to train both of us. Fast forward to now, 24 years later, everyone sees us in the gym, but nobody understands how intentional it was that we've gotten to this point. Most people find that they don't want to work out with their spouses because they find it too competitive or it's too hard or there's so many excuses as to why they don't want to work out with their spouse. But I also know that the reason why you're not it's not as successful or it's not working out is because you're not thinking of the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that the number of hours that you're going to work out in a week multiplied by months and years, the duration of your life, is a lot. It amounts to a lot. If I thought back on how often I used to work out, I used to work out for like an hour and a half, like 3, 4 times a week. That's a lot of hours that I'm spending away from, not counting work, that I'm spending away from my partner doing something that is a hobby. And I'm not involving him. Now, don't get me wrong, we have things that we do separately, but that's a really important part. Why am I going to be super healthy and he's not? How do I say that we're going to age together if I'm specifically just, doing my own thing and leaving him to not be as healthy? How are we going to age together? How are we going to grow old together? Most likely, I will be fit, he won't be. So it's a very intentional thing that you are putting into place, or that I put into place early on in my relationship. And it's one of those things that I'm really proud of because not only did it impact my husband and I, my son is also one that works out with us as well. So it became another focal point, and you can use any of these focal points that I'm talking about. It could be anything that's important to you. Try to find ways to bring your family members into it. Yes, they might not understand it, but give it time. That's where we go back to that patience. But yes, that's one of the things that I did. And I could give you so many different examples, but we want to keep it short. But yeah, that's one of the many things that I did to keep us closely connected and to bring intentionality into my life on a daily basis. Lastly, there is a recurring thought that is always in my mind: long term, long term, long term. And why do I say long term? There's so many things, so many little skirmishes that you're going to have, and you're going to think that, oh my God, this is going to be it. But when I'm thinking of all of these little things, I always think about how is it going to impact my bigger picture, our future together. So, for example, we could have a disagreement over the cover of a bottle being on the side. Now, mind you, that's not really anything major if I sit back and look at it in its entirety. If we're talking about, well, I don't want to work out with you, for example, I would try to find out the why. The bottle cover is not that serious. The workout is. Workout I intend to do as long as I can. That bottle cover, not that serious. We sometimes, as people, don't pick our battles the right way. I always do. Anything I want to correct, I'm always thinking about the future. If it's, let's say for my son, if it's how he speaks on certain issues, I would always correct it when necessary so that he understands what it is he's done wrong. Or if it's something regarding my spouse, I always explain it because, again, this is something that could come back up. I need to address this. Some things, not so much. But other things that like, you know what, if I look this all the way through and I'm thinking more long term, how is this going to impact us going forward? That's the kind of questions that I'm asking myself before I make any decision, before I say anything. I'm always thinking about the bigger picture. Is this going to help solidify us, bring us closer together, or is it going to pull us apart? The things that are going to pull us apart, those are the things that you avoid. But I am also the queen of having those very, very difficult conversations. I don't avoid anything, because anything that you avoid is going to end up biting you in the butt later on down the line. In conclusion, there are gentle, little, subtle ways to make your life more intentional. You are very, very important to this picture. I've realized early on that I don't want to be alone. When you say you don't want to be alone, that means that, okay, you need to make space for other people. And so I did. But it's not just about making space for them. You've also got to understand them. In order for you to stay happy, the other people in your life have got to be happy too. If your child is not doing well, you're not going to be happy. If your spouse is unhappy, he's going to make you unhappy. So it's all connected. Your happiness matters. Intentionality is about making sure that everything that is involved in your life is all working you're all working together. That's the most successful way to do that. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Deliberately Intentional. We are here every Wednesday on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Bye, everyone.